Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. Today, we'll be talking about proformas and custom calculations. My name is Holly Conrad Smith, and I will be guiding you through this webinar today. We're going to give it a couple more minutes for a few more people to log in. If you want, while you're waiting, feel free to introduce yourselves in the webinar chat, and I'll check back here shortly once a few more folks have logged on. All right, I think we've got a good group going here, so let's get started. Again, if I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you yet, my name is Holly. I am a customer success manager here at Giraffe. Um, and today we're going to be taking a look at how to create your own custom calculations using Giraffe Analytics. This is one of my personal favorite parts of Giraffe. I have a background as a construction estimator, a BIM manager. So being able to count and get all of the information out of my models is always top of mind for me. So I'm really excited to share how to do that with you all today. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. At the end of the session, if we have some extra time, we can hang out and do live questions. So at that time, if you're feeling brave, you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you and you can ask the question live. And otherwise, throughout the session, I'll try to keep my eye on the webinar chat as I have availability. Uh, the last thing to note is we will record this session and it will get posted to our YouTube channel pretty shortly after we've finished up today. So if you want to share it with any of your colleagues or stakeholders who are also looking at Giraffe, please feel free to go to our YouTube channel and send that link along. And with that, let's dive right in here. So today I'm going to use an industrial project as our example. I think this is really exciting because we do a lot of demonstrations with apartments and residential buildings, and that's all fun and good. But we know a lot of you are also industrial and commercial developers. We want to make sure we include that kind of information in our webinars as well. Um, so as a little bit of background on how Giraffe works, um, while you're drawing in Giraffe, everything is already automatically being counted in the background. So if I come into my buildings tool and I grab the industrial usage and just lay down this shape on the map, Giraffe already knows, okay, this shape is 242,000 square feet. It has a length and a width. It has a location on the globe, so everything is also geolocated. Um, but I also, if you notice, selected the industrial usage here from the buildings tool. That means that there's some additional calculations that are already included in that shape that are different from if I had selected, for instance, the hotel usage or even a shape with no usage would still have some calculations, but not all of the ones that are included when you select a use. Um, so that's one of the really cool things about Giraffe is you can define all of these additional assumptions and calculations and attributes that are building use specific, and then reuse those again and again throughout your project. So if I come over to my left-hand palette and open this up, you'll see that I have a few different buttons here on the side that will open up different tooling that's in the left-hand palette. The first one I want to take a look at is our usage editor. The usage editor looks like a few filters or sliders. And when I click that, it opens into this flyout, and it sort of defaults to whatever usage I have first in the list. But let's take a look at our industrial usage. When I open up my industrial usage, I see that it has a bunch of properties already assigned. An important one, of course, is your building efficiency. That's something that, you as real estate developers are always thinking about how much area of this, building footprint is actual usable area. So you can assign that percentage in the efficiencies. You can also assign it a floor to floor height that will say how tall is the building on each level. Of course, typically industrial buildings are one level, but sometimes you might have a special use industrial, like perhaps a self-storage or something like that, that might have multiple levels. And then you can also set how much parking is required per the ratio of parking for the area of building. So right now, this one's only set at 0.9 for industrial. Depending on where you are, that might make sense. Maybe it's a really large manufacturing warehouse and you don't have a lot of people working there, so you don't need a lot of parking. But maybe it's something where maybe it's a distribution center and there's actually lots of people working there. So the cool thing is that you can come into these usages and really customize them to be exactly what you need them to be. So say maybe your parking ratio needs to be 3 instead of 1, you can come in here and edit that and update it. And once you do that, the parking calculations that Giraffe is doing in the background are automatically going to take that into account. So it's going to tell you, oh, you need more parking based on that number you've put in there. And then down here at the bottom, we have some additional things, our hard costs, our soft costs, the area per job, and our net rent. We'll take a look at these a little bit more once we get into the pro forma, but just basically understand that this is where you're going to set up those cost assumptions for each of your different usages. Um, so what I typically recommend if you are a brand new Giraffe user, open up that default Giraffe template that has, probably way more uses than you will ever need to use for your typical project, and just go through each one and make sure that the numbers make sense for your business. Everyone operates in different areas. Everyone builds different kinds of products. So you want to really judge those numbers so that it actually represents something that makes sense for what you personally are working on. I even like to recommend if you're not someone who's ever going to work on a hotel, delete the hotel usage right out of your project. You don't need it, just delete it. And then it's not going to be in your way when you're selecting things. It's not going to be gumming things up, being confusing. Um, And then the last thing that you might want to do is create your own new usage. So in Giraffe, the way you create a new usage is actually by cloning an existing one. And for the reason for that is you want to make sure that you get a bunch of the existing properties and calculations included with each new usage. There's a lot of usages that have some sort of special things built into them to make sure that the Giraffe calculation engine works correctly. So if I want to create a new industrial use type, I'm going to come to the industrial usage, click clone, and maybe I want a new one that's called distribution center. And I'll just click OK. And now I have this new distribution center use that I can give different numbers. So maybe the efficiency for a distribution center is more like 80%. Maybe I want to have a slightly different color so that I can tell what it is on the map. And maybe the cost to build the distribution center is a little bit cheaper. Maybe it's 500 instead. So you can come in and adjust those things and make sure that you have all of your assumptions set up. I like to do it before I really get started with my analytics, but it's also something you can do as you go along. So we've just gone through the usages in Giraffe. All of those calculations are here in the usage editor on the left-hand side. And then these usages, as you're drawing, will get assigned to your geometries. So if you come to the buildings tool here in the top bar, you'll see a list of all of the usages in your project, including any that you've created. So you can see here that distribution center that I just made by cloning the industrial. So now I have distribution center available to draw with. And when I draw, it includes all of those calculations that I had saved in the usages. So with that background, now we can really dive into the meat, into the actual analytics engine in Giraffe. I wanted to make sure that we were really clear about all of the things that go into a use, because all of those assumptions and numbers and information that you save on the use is going to be extremely important when you're building out your custom calculations, because it reads all of that information to give you the report of the final number that you're looking for. All right, so once we are done drawing our project and we have our usages set up, we can jump into analytics. Analytics is on the right-hand side. By default, you get this sort of, very graphic, but also very high level sort of analytical overview of your project. This is great for like your first cursory glance, but we all know that we need to dive in a little deeper, right? We need to make sure that some of the more specific items about our particular development type or our local region's requirements are all being reflected in our reporting and our project. And that's where analytics comes in. So right above the urban tab, which has this little house icon, you're going to see this icon that looks like sort of a square root, and that is your analytics tool. And when you open it up for the first time in a project that doesn't have an analytics template applied, it's going to prompt you to create a new one from scratch. So let's do that. I'm going to click Start from a blank slate. Let me zoom in a little bit so that we can see everything I'm doing a little bit better. And the first thing it's going to ask you is to create a category. This will make more sense once we get fully in there, but a category is basically a heading that multiple calculations will be under. So think to your, typical Excel document report that you're building out. You probably have a heading that says like, built environment. And then you'll have another heading that says hard costs and another heading that says maybe operating expenses. All of those headings are categories in analytics. So the first one I'm going to create, I'm just going to call build form. I can assign it a color if I wish. This blue is actually quite attractive, so I'll just leave that. And I'll click create category. And now I'm dropped into what will be my analytics report. This right now doesn't look like much because we haven't built any measures, but as we go, you're going to see it start to fill out with lots of different calculations. And then you can just come here after those calculations are built out and just see the values as you're designing. Um, so we'll take a look a little bit at some of the configuration settings and groupings in a bit, but let's build out some just general calculations to get started, just to get us a little bit more familiar with how it works. So you can see your category was dropped right here on this initial tab. And I'm going to click the plus here to add a calculation to my category. And when I do that, my measure creator pops up here. And there's a lot of information going on, but it's really intended to help guide you through the creation of this calculation. So the first thing we want to do is give this calculation a name. And I'm going to start with something really basic, just my gross building area. And then the next thing I need to select is what the unit of measure is for that. So I'm in an imperial project, so my unit of measure for gross building area is going to be square feet. And then the rest of this is not relevant to this particular calculation. We'll take a look at some of these things in a little bit. But then I need to start telling this calculation how to pull information from my model. So I'm going to tell it what specific assumptions and properties to look at to be able to create the calculation that I want. So the first calculation that I want is just like I'm trying to create my gross building area. So I'm going to just start searching. There's a lot in here, so you can scroll, but I'm just gonna search for what I'm looking for and it'll pop right up. I'll select my gross building area property. And then you can see that this component has been assigned a letter. This letter is how I tell my formula to pull that calculation into it. So for this formula, I'm just going to type A. This one's super simple. All I'm doing is reporting the gross building area. So I only need one component and I don't even need to do any math to it. I'm just pulling that in to report it out. Um, so here I have everything saved. I can see a preview of what my calculation result will be. And you'll notice here that I have this little report of each geometry in my project and what the calculation is being performed on it. So we're pulling in gross building area, which is only the area of buildings, right? So when I'm looking here, it's showing me road and it's in red because there is no gross building area for a road because it's not a building. If I want to sort of double check each of these geometries to make sure it's calculating correctly, I can just start flipping through. There's a lot of trees in this project, so let me see if I can get past them all. There we go. It's starting. I might not be able to get past them all. Yeah, lots of roads and trees at the beginning. If I want my calculation to, instead of going through every geometry in the project, if I know that there's certain geometries that aren't going to be relevant right off the bat, I can add a filter to this calculation just to make it a little bit easier to see what's going on. So if I add a filter here, and I'm going to filter by type, and the type is building. Now I can see here in my list only the features that this property is available on. So now I'm seeing my commercial, my data center, my other commercial, and my warehouse, and they're listed here with their particular areas. Once I click save, that's going to drop into my report. And that is how we're going to create these calculations. So I'm just going to sort of run through a lot of calculations really quickly. and sort of build out this pro forma from scratch in front of you all. So let's go. The next one I want to understand is my net building area. So I'm going to click on plus. I'm going to call this one net building area. And again, it's square feet. And then this one, I'm going to calculate. So I'll show you that. I'm going to pull in my gross building area. And then I'm going to pull in my efficiency. I'm going to do A times B. So you can see that the efficiency factor, which is saved on each usage, is now being applied to that gross building area to give me my net area. And I'll save that. So now I have a comparison of my gross to my net. The next one that I want to calculate out is my site coverage ratio. So I'm going to click to add another measure. Call this one site coverage. This one I'm going to leave unitless because it's going to be a ratio. It could be considered a percent as well, depending on how you want to think about it. And then in my components, this time instead of property, I'm actually going to pull in site areas. And the difference between a property and a site area is the properties are calculations performed on each individual geometry, whereas a site area is sort of a roll-up calculation that the Giraffe engine is doing in the back end based on the area of your site boundary that you created when you first started the project. So I'm going to pull in my site total area first, and then I'm going to pull in my building total area. And then I'm going to divide the building area by site area to get that ratio. And I've got 34% basically site coverage here. Save that. And now I have that in my report as well. And that is sort of my basics of just like building areas built form. And now we can start getting into some things that are a little bit more specific to an industrial project. Specifically, I want to look at calculating how many racks, how many data racks will fit in this data center. That's a really important metric if you're building a data center, of course. So let's take a look at how we would do that. So I'm actually going to start a new category for that, and I'm going to call this just IT planning, perhaps. Create. And before I start creating those calculations, let me just show you something. So if I pop back open my usage editor, under data center, I have some additional properties that I've created custom to add on to my data center. I did that by just clicking on plus property, and I started typing in a new property name and did create. Here you can sort of set up the property. Basically, it's just a number that I'm going to type in to represent the rack size. And once I have that, it's now saved on my use. And it's another property that I can do calculations against in analytics. So it's really flexible. You're not locked into only the properties that Giraffe gives you. You can create literally anything. It's just applying a label to a number and then using that number in a calculation against the geometric properties of that element to be able to get that readout that you're looking for. So it's really, if you think about it, very similar to an Excel sort of sheet where, you know, in one column you might have the size of all of your buildings, and in another column you might have the size of all of your racks, and then you're going to do some calculations against those to get your rack count. So let me do that for you. So I'm going to calculate my rack count. And here the unit of measure is actually the number of racks, right? And I don't have that unit, so I'm going to create a new unit just by typing racks. and I'll put that in there. And now I have this brand new unit of measure that I can use. The precision for this, I want to be 0 because I can't have half a rack, right? You want the number of decimal places to round to the nearest full number. So it's going to do that for you. And then in my components, I'm going to bring in my net area and my rack area. And I want to figure out how many racks can fit. Did this backwards. How many racks can fit in the area of that data center. And just by dividing the net area, the net floor area by the rack area, I can get that number. And then the next thing I want to do is figure out what the IT load of that is going to be. So I'm going to bring this in. The unit is going to be megawatts, so I'm going to create a new unit for megawatts. And then here, I'm actually going to reference that calculation I already created. So I'm going to bring in my rack count. And I'm going to bring in my gross building area, both calculations I've already created. And the oops, actually, I need to, sorry, doing this live and getting myself turned around. Yes. So rack load is also a property that I created on that data center. So I need to do the rack count times the load. And this is megawatts. And then I get the resulting megawatts that I am looking at for that number of racks. So again, just simply adding my own custom properties here to be able to calculate something that's very specific to this kind of project, to a data center type project. Another thing that might be important to calculate for an industrial project, or really anywhere where water runoff is a concern, is the required amount of detention. So the required size of the pond that you might need to catch that water runoff. So I'll start a new category here called detention. And I'm going to use some assumptions to be able to calculate if this detention pond I've drawn is big enough. So the first thing I need to calculate is my impervious area. And the impervious area, again, is a site area thing. So it's the building area plus paving plus roads. So all of the areas within the site that are impervious surfaces. My area is going to be in square feet. And this one, I'm just adding these all together to get my total area. And then usually when you're calculating your required amount of detention, your local municipality or area will give you a required detention coefficient. So you can just input that into your model. So I'm going to create my detention coefficient. I'm going to spell it correctly. And this is not a property that's in the model. This is just a number that I'm inputting. So I'm actually just going to remove the components completely and just hard code a number in here. So the detention coefficient I'm using is just 0.6, and I'll save that. And then I can calculate my required volume of detention by taking my, again, my measure, my impervious area times my detention coefficient, required detention, and oops, I must have clicked off of this. Impervious area, coefficient. I'm just going to do A times B. And then I'll get my resulting cubic feet of detention. Um, from there, what I can do is calculate how much area I actually have in this pond by when I click on the pond and open up the properties, I can give the water a depth. And then I would just calculate my detention volume as the area times the water depth. And then you can see very quickly that I don't have quite enough pond. So I need to make this one a little bit bigger or add another one. So it's really easy to see the comparison there. So those were some sort of just generic kind of site metrics, things that might, as a industrial developer, be really important to me. But of course, those are not necessarily part of the pro forma. They might be things that are really important to your decision making, and not being able to fit enough racks into the data center size could kill a project right off the bat. Um, but of course, we also want to take a look at some of the costing information for these things. So let's do that next. So I'm actually going to start a whole new tab here for my pro forma. And it just creates another tab in my analytics view, and that just helps keep things kind of organized. And then I'm going to add a new category here, and I'm going to call it costs. And here's where I'm going to start calculating the basic costs of my project. Again, just another measure here, and this one is going to be hard cost. And this one now, the unit of measure will be currency. And then the property I'm pulling in is my gross building area times my hard cost property that I have stored on all of those times B. And doing this, I can get a really quick view of what my estimated hard cost is going to be. If I think this number doesn't look quite right, I can come into this component, this hard cost component, and this sneaky little pencil here is going to open up a new view that actually shows me the hard cost that's stored on every single usage in my project. So I can come in here and be like, okay, is my car park gonna be 100? I don't know. These are all surface parks, so probably not. Is my commercial 265 a square foot? Maybe. And you can just sort of come down through here and see how much money per square foot we've got assigned to the usages that we're using. Um, Warehouse 250, and I had industrial, I think. Industrial, maybe 900 is a bit high, maybe it's just 400. And then I can save this, and I need to I needed to have saved that first so that it didn't lose my information. So here, I'm going to put it in my hard costs again. Gross building area, hard cost, A times B, and I get my value out the end. Now, when I start getting into these costs, a lot of them are very similar calculations over and over again. So rather than starting completely from scratch, I like to actually just open up that existing calculation I created and do duplicate. And now I'm going to do soft cost. And the soft cost, the only difference is that it's a different property here. But the formula is still the same. Everything else is still the same. So I can just save that and really quickly get that additional calculation in there. Um, and then as a construction estimator, I know you always got to add a contingency. So I'm going to take my components out of here and just add a sneaky 10% contingency. And then my total here is going to be, again, using those measures that I already created, my hard cost plus my soft cost. Currency, and it's going to be A plus B plus B times C to get my total in there with the contingency included. Another thing that you can do is add in maybe a hard-coded thing for purchase price or any other sort of costs that come up in your project. You can just add those in as line items, just like we did for hard and soft cost. The next category for our pro forma is our incomes. And our income here for industrial development is just going to be our net rent. So I'm going to do my net area times my net rent. And I have that number here. Our incomes would be sort of more complicated if you were doing a residential development, say, because you'll have to have different prices per different apartment unit, and maybe you have amenity space that doesn't have any rent assigned. So if you want to see how I've done a residential pro forma in the past, just pop open YouTube and go to our channel, and there's a recording of me doing a pro forma for a residential in there as well. So you can get an idea of how that one works. The next thing that we need to take a look at is our expenses. And for expenses, I like to just do an OpEx rate. And this is also just a hard-coded component. Maybe it's 25%. And I will take my measure here, my net rent that I calculated, and my OpEx. Just do A times B. Rating expenses, currency again. So I get that number. And then finally, after we've built out all of those initial parts of the pro forma, we get to the actual feasibility calculations, right? So in this next category, I'm going to calculate our cap rate, our NOI, return on cost, and our terminal value. So what I typically like to do for cap rate is just also include this as a hard-coded thing. So I'm going to give it a good old 5%. Unitless, save that. And then when I calculate my NOI, my net operating income, it is just the ratio of my net rent to my operating expenses. So I get that NOI value. And then my return on cost is my total cost divided by my NOI. So again, this is a my total cost, my NOI. So I'm again reusing all of these existing calculations so I don't have to do them over and over again. And then my last calculation is going to be my terminal value. And terminal value is going to be my, exit value. So I'm going to take my my measure, cap rate, and my net rent. And I'm going to do B5A. Whoops, don't need to add an additional one there. So there you have it. Obviously, this is a very high level pro forma. But the cool thing about sort of this level is probably it's something that you would be doing sort of on your scratch pad, maybe even during your meeting with your architect. Traditionally, they're like displaying all these things and being like, oh, it's a beautiful building, it's so cool. But you're, scribbling to the side, being like, does this actually pencil out? The cool thing here is that Giraffe is doing that scribbling on the side for you while you see what fits on your site. And these analytics that you build out are really easy to use over and over again. Um, so I can come into my configure here and pretend I'm in a whole new project. You can import any calculations from any project that you like. So I have projects in my workspace that I can draw from. And here I'm just looking at all of the analytics calculations that are in this other project, for instance. So once I have this built out in one project, it's really easy to just drop it into each new project as I go. So what did that take me? 20 minutes to build out this back of the napkin calculations. And now I can reuse it over and over again, 3 seconds to add it to each of my new projects. And I don't have to worry about doing those calculations manually anymore. It's also pretty easy to beef up these calculations, beef up your pro forma, and make it even more detailed. We have customers who do things like have an entire assumptions page and they're building out of all of their construction rates and doing some very sort of complicated math in the background. But then what it does is it frees them up to really worry about, does the design work? Does it fit inside of, the allowable areas? Are the setbacks being taken in, uh, taken into account? All of those sort of physical space things that often in the past have been sort of left by the wayside, are now available for you to do yourselves and sort of worry about and let the math do itself in the background. Um, so that was sort of my overview today of Giraffe Analytics. We started out by taking a look at Giraffe usages, understanding that all of the properties and attributes and assumptions stored in those usages is what we are going to use to pull into analytics. Then we created a new analytics template from scratch, which allowed us to really build out the categories and calculations that were important to us, including really specific things like our detention area or even our rack count and our wattage load. And then after that, we built out a back of the napkin pro forma. We calculated costs, incomes, expenses, and rolled it all up into some basic feasibility metrics. And we did all of that in less than an hour in Giraffe. So imagine, taking less than an hour to get your account set up, get your analytics underway, and just continue to use that as you go, to really sort of speed up your different studies. Um, so I want to thank you all for joining me today. That is the end of the presentation that I have planned. However, I'm happy to hang out for a few minutes if you want to ask some specific questions. I will just stop the recording, and if you'd like to ask a question live, feel free to raise your hand and I will unmute you. So, with that, thanks so much for joining us today, and I hope I see you at the next one.